This is John Chenal with Vader TV, and I'm here with Roger Burkhart, CEO and President of Ingres Corp, open source database company that's been growing fast. Roger, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, database, when you think of database software, it's not exactly a fast-growing market, especially going in against Oracle. I think you told me that last year, July over July, you guys had 70% bookings growth. What is it that you're offering customers that are convincing people to buy your stuff?
Well, it's a different business model. It's a business model that puts the customer back in charge. And this open source model is itself growing very, very rapidly. So although relational database technology has been around a long time, in fact, Ingres at Berkeley was part of inventing it 30 years ago with Mike Stonebreaker and so on. What's new here is a new business model that takes away those license fees and puts the customer back in charge.
Now, you're not necessarily convincing large enterprises to pull out the Oracle and put you into the center of their networks. You said it's more different units or departments people are adding. You inherited a bunch of customers 2-3 years ago when you were spun out of CA, and you're adding to them by bringing people in at the periphery of their applications?
Typically, people are putting open source into new applications just because if you've got something that works already, people's normal inclination is to leave it well alone.
Right.
The thing that's unique about Ingres in the open source database world is that it's capable of being used for the most demanding applications. And those customers you talked about that we've had for many years are using Ingres to run totally mission critical applications. So in the technology space, Cypress Semiconductor runs its production line on Ingres. If Ingres stops, the wafers stop coming off the end of the line. Barclays Bank runs its operations in the UK on Ingres. Again, totally mission critical. The Irish Revenue Commissioners, which is the government tax system of Ireland, collects every euro they collect through an Ingres system. So the technology and our support has been proven for those really mission critical applications. And so as customers like the open source business model, but don't want to have any compromises or any concerns about either the technology or the support, or as we discussed, the intellectual property, they can turn to Ingres and get an open source business model without any compromises.
And now you're open source, but also that part of the stack that you own and service, you actually own and write the license for. So it's not like a Fortune 1000 companies having to take the risk that they're buying something that you may not own and be able to have the rights.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that people are concerned about open source is that they bring in some open source software and then it turns out that the provider doesn't really have the rights to it, and then they're into sort of litigation issues. And so Ingres provides a support subscription. As part of that, we provide a full indemnity because we know where all the intellectual property came from because we wrote most of it, and anything we add, we make sure that we know where it comes from. So we can provide actually a very similar protection, almost identical wording to what you would get from a legacy traditional software license.
Now, you were brought in as president in July of last year, assumed the CEO title, I believe, in August. You've also just brought in somebody, Sybase veteran, as CFO. And you're bringing in someone else soon. You're starting to look like a company that's thinking about going public. What's the chances we might see something next year in terms of an offering?
Well, we certainly have put a management team in place that's capable of growing this to be a large public company. And we've been doing the work to give ourselves that option. We have had 2 cash flow positive quarters. We'll be cash flow positive for all of 2008 and turning profitable at the end of 2008. So we're at the kind of point where we have that option ahead of us. And we're putting all the pieces in place so that we can take that decision a little nearer the time.
Right. And last question, you're not only open source, but you're also software as a service subscription based. And is that, I mean, that has been pretty highly valued by Wall Street investors. Do you anticipate that you might get, a comparable type of valuation as somebody like, a Salesforce or anyone else that uses a subscription model?
Yeah, well, if you talk to investment bankers, and of course investment bankers love to pitch on these kind of things, they put the open source companies like ourselves that have a subscription model into the same comparables group as the software as a service companies like a Salesforce, or shortly we'll see with NetSuite what kind of multiples they get. And in both cases, the common link is that the revenue is extremely predictable. We collect a subscription up front, a year in advance. We get the cash at the beginning, and then we recognize the revenue over 12 months. So our forward visibility into revenue is extremely good, and we don't expect the kind of fluctuations in revenue that you get from a traditional license model where investors have all too often been caught out when a bad quarter suddenly causes a stock to tank. So that predictability is highly valued, and the bankers actually are keen to find companies with those kind of predictable forward revenues. There aren't that many of them. And there are, Red Hat obviously is the big player in the open source world. Salesforce is the poster child in the software as a service model. But there's a fairly small number of companies that have those characteristics and also have the scale to become a full public company.
Right. Right, and that's why we'll be watching. Like you said, there's not that many, so they'll be fully valued. We'll be looking at NetSuite and probably looking for you guys next year and seeing how that's valued.
We'll see how that goes.
Roger, thanks a lot for the time.
It's great to be with you. Thanks a lot.
I've been speaking today with Roger Burkhardt, President and CEO of the database, open source database company, Ingres Corp. For Vader TV, this is John Chenal.